Hello and welcome to the Next Gen Warrior Podcast. My name is Dan Hamilton. As always, the Next Gen Warrior Podcast is brought to you by Chairman George P. Bush and the Veterans Land Board. Today I have the great distinction of sitting down with Craig Cummings, the general partner at Moonshoots Capital. Craig, before we get started, I want to read a part of your bio here and then kind of get your feedback on it, okay? In 2015, Craig was selected by HillVets as one of the 100 most influential and impactful veterans in the United States. And in 2016, Inc. magazine named him as one of the top 20 military veteran entrepreneurs in the United States. When you hear that, what's your reaction?
Honored, unexpected. It makes me feel like the things that I've been doing in my career are the right things, which have generally been pay it forward, be positive, help others.
So by saying unexpected, when you got out of the military, you did 17 years in the Army, is that correct?
Yes.
And you said, okay, now I want to go work in finance industry and capital. I want to help run businesses and build businesses.
Yep.
So what was the differentiation between I have an interest in this and, well, I'm still, the successes that I've had and the growth that I've had is somewhat unexpected?
Well, with those honors in particular, I had no idea that I showed up on both of those lists, unexpected. I did not apply for those. So that's what I mean when I say unexpected. Yeah. But certainly when I left the military, and we can talk about that, leaving in my 17th year, to begin a journey in entrepreneurship, I wanted to be as successful as possible. And I think what layers on top of that is being a veteran, right? Because we do carry this additional tag, which you want to represent that brand, the veteran brand, to show that we can do this. We can be entrepreneurs, we can be successful, we can build, grow, sell companies. And now we're trying to do it on the investment side.
So tell the audience why you decided to get out of the service at 17 years, and before you start on that, for our audience who may be unfamiliar with veteran retirement, at 17 years you are knocking on the door of retirement, you're knocking on the door of having a pension, and really kind of a stable transition out of the service into kind of your next career field. And you took essentially a hard left.
I did.
Because you had an entrepreneurial itch.
That's right.
What was that?
You know, what that day was, it was my last day of what I say in the civilian world of my earnout. And it was the obligation that I had built for having done a PhD while I was on active duty. Mm-hmm. So once I fulfilled my payback to the Army for allowing me to do a PhD on active duty, I decided to take that hard left turn. And my overall position, life writ large, is, timing is everything. And I just felt like I had such a great journey in the Army, and I was, my last job was at the National Security Agency. Mm-hmm. I was living in Washington, D.C. I was watching friends around me start businesses. I was intrigued with what they were doing. I wanted to be a part of it, and I felt like this is the right time to do it. So, father, Air Force Colonel, 26 years. Oldest brother, West Point graduate, Colonel, 26 years. Next oldest brother, West Point graduate, 28 years. Dan Cummings, Steve Cummings. Mother, Department of the Army, civilian.
It's an all-American family.
My joke is that we don't have family reunions, we have family formations. So you can imagine my family, when I said I'm getting out my 17th year, they're like, no, you're not. And I'm like, yes, I am. And what happened is, so I partnered with two other vets, two West Point graduates, Guy Filippelli and Nick Hallam, and we were talking about forming this company alongside an amazing entrepreneur, Sean Lane, to put the first cellular network on the battlefield. And I really felt like we had a shot at it. So I get out. 2 weeks later, my wife feels a lump on her right breast. 2 weeks later, double mastectomy. 2 weeks later, chemotherapy. So now I make this big decision to exit the umbrella of the Army and all its safeguards, to do a startup, and then my wife comes down with breast cancer. So fast forward now, it's about 4 months later, we were had this vision called Swarm for the battlefield. We don't need to talk about that. We had 45 days left in the business. I had not told my wife, who now is completely bald and in the haze of chemotherapy. And I went back to our government customers that we were talking to, and I said, look, if we don't get a purchase order, we're going out of business. And I remember the government customer, Callie Walker, said, oh, Craig, absolutely, let's do some of this. And so she's like, let's do 1, 2, 3. So right as the plane is crashing, we get a purchase order.
Off.
And then literally we had a briefing that we had built with the vision of a cellular network on the battlefield, a pitch deck. I pulled together a room of some seniors in the intel community. They loved it. They took the deck to the Army 3-star intel officer, Lieutenant General Zahner, and he said, I want to do that. I want to put a cellular network on the battlefield. And so right as it's a crash, burn, level off, and then we get this massive purchase order, which becomes stress unto itself, because now we actually have to deliver on what we said
What you've
we
promised.
would do.
What kept you going in the personal struggle with fighting cancer along with your wife, and then seeing, like you said, the stability that you had in the service was no longer there? What was, when you got up in the morning, what was your thought that made you, put your feet down on the floor and say, I'm going to keep going, I'm going to keep pursuing this, I'm going to keep doing this, even though you were in the midst of not just a difficult circumstance, but maybe an unknown circumstance?
Yeah. Well, it always starts with having great partners, and I knew that we could pull this off. I knew that we could pull this off. It was a great idea, and the technology really it was a network of military veterans on this technology, and so I knew that we could do this. But this is something I actually say to transitioning vets. I say this to everybody. Getting out in your 17th year, to think that you can be successful as an entrepreneur is literally like the proverbial tying your hands to the steering wheel, putting your reputation on the table and saying, I can do this. And I was so close to failure, which I'm always mindful that the line between success and failure is a very thin line. But saying you're going to do this, and then knowing that your whole reputation now, 17 years in the Army and beyond, is at stake, you find a way. It's like take the hill, and we just got to find another route in, despite the adverse conditions. We got to get up that hill. And so I've done that my whole career, to be perfectly honest. When I was finishing my PhD, which I did at Columbia, I told all my senior officers, I'm going to finish this PhD before my son is born.
What was that timetable?
I defended it the day before he was born.
Oh my gosh.
And so I love the idea of setting forcing functions for yourself with your reputation. And I think, going back to your original question, that was what I felt like, we're going to figure this out.
If you could go back, what would you tell yourself before leaving the Army?
It's a great question. I think I would say there is way more uncertainty out there than you probably anticipate. But this is something I say about entrepreneurship, and I just told you a story, like a life and death story with my wife.
Right.
And now we were almost out of money. We had 45 days of cash in the business. But the truth is, you can try your hand at entrepreneurship. If it doesn't work out, you got plenty of other opportunities.
Right.
And I'm mindful that even myself, sometimes we tell these stories like it's this unbelievable, put myself out there, took a risk, and these stories are true. I mean, credit cards, all the things you do to your family.
Yeah.
But I think with the veteran skill set, you can always default into defense contracting, working with friends. So that's why I'm like, this isn't life or death. Give it a shot. If it doesn't work out, then default.
Yeah.
Reset, and then you can give it a shot again.
So that's almost saying, hey, you're going to take a risk, but I think there's a big difference between taking a risk and taking a calculated risk.
Sure.
And what you would go back and tell yourself is like, hey, it's going to be uncertain. There's going to be maybe more uncertainty than you expect.
Yeah.
But you're taking a calculated risk where,
Yes.
to some degree, there are guardrails, there are some fail-safes where you can go down a different route if this doesn't work out and the wheels are not going to fall off. You can keep pushing, you can keep driving, and you can find your way, even though it might be a little bit different than you thought it would.
For sure. Well said, Dan.
Let me go to kind of your current work now with Moonshots Capital.
Yeah.
So Moonshots Capital has a commitment to invest in what you describe as extraordinary leadership. Tell us what that means to you.
Well, the story we just said, getting through those times was about leadership. And, we come from a background of military training. And so our success on the battlefield is a direct function of the strength of the leadership in the military. Mm-hmm. So our magnetic north is nothing is more important to the success of a company, a startup, than its leadership. And who has had millions and millions of dollars training them to be great leaders, but military veterans.
Sure.
So we love that talent pool. We love to back military veterans when we can. But it's not just the military veteran population. And just because you're a vet doesn't make you a great leader.
Sure.
So we also back extraordinary leaders, people who are repeat entrepreneurs who have those battle wounds, people who are domain experts in certain
By domain
areas.
expertise, you mean industry leaders or
Industry expertise who really know that space so well that they're going to know how to lead you into it and then navigate throughout it. And Moonshots I do with fellow veteran, fellow West Point graduate, Kelly Purdue. And I can tell that story.
Yeah, so I do. I'm interested to know, you have a great relationship with Kelly Purdue. Why do you think y'all work together so well?
Well, when we assess companies, we like co-founders. We like strong marriages in startups. And I think if you look at us, I would say we have a very strong marriage, Kelly and I.
Yeah. So
we go back to 2005. Kelly had just won season 2 of The Apprentice in December of 2004. I've left Columbia, I'm teaching at West Point, and I literally get assigned to be the officer in charge of his visit. OIC, to use military language, right?
Yeah.
To bring Kelly back up to West Point, because when he won that show, 30 million people watched that.
It's a huge deal.
It was 60 million people watched the Super Bowl, 30 million people watched The Apprentice. So he was out of the military now. He had gotten out, served his time, gotten out, done a JD, MBA at UCLA, and started a successful entrepreneur career, ducked out, got selected for The Apprentice.
Now he's a
And
national
he was the biggest
celebrity.
And he was honestly, he was like the biggest name in the Army, associated with the Army, not in the Army.
Right.
And so we met in January of 2005. We became fast friends. I was watching him become CEO and exit companies, and then he went back and became an advisor to LinkedIn and Pandora, became one of Los Angeles's super angels. And so there's no doubt that watching Kelly's trajectory and then watching other friends who were starting businesses, that the itch was starting to form for me to scratch.
So you were able to watch people go through this process of leaving the service while you were still in?
Yes. Yeah.
Would you say that you and Kelly then, as you're watching him, are you looking at maybe some of his weaknesses and maybe where you can support him and vice versa in your kind of business relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I looked at his weaknesses and said I could shore those up. I think I was focused on his strengths and sort of being able to grip hands with him and be part of that strength. And if you watch that season of The Apprentice, Kelly won it running away. He crushed it. And what I tell people now is he's a 5X version of that. So what that means is that there's a lot of mutual respect. And I think we both, like any marriage, we both feel fortunate to be with one another. And to your point, we do complement each other. The joke among our portfolio founders is sort of like, I'm the mom, he's the dad. and they know how to talk to us, we know how to talk to each other. We communicate with one voice, but there's times you're gonna
different approaches, maybe?
Yeah, you're gonna talk to dad about this one, talk to mom about this one. So we get along really well. And Kelly's been there through my wife's cancer journey times too. So we watched each other's kids grow up.
Yeah.
And so part of our strength of Moonshots Capital is for investors is just like we look at startups, investors look at the team. and say, how do these two get along? Because a lot of VC firms, the partners can get sideways. And so we feel like we got the marriage thing down.
Right.
We got that. And now it's just about
Do you think that's,
picking great companies.
So I know you obviously had, you have shared interests, you have a shared industry, but is it really that the personalities mesh that is what makes everything else kind of run, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a key part of it, and understanding each other's personality, understanding how to ingest it, shore it up, communicate, shoot, move, communicate. But definitely it's the blend of personalities, and I think we are especially strong in that regard.
So you guys have been incredibly successful, not just as a team, but as coworkers, and you've obviously invested in very successful businesses.
Yeah.
That means that you are able to evaluate companies either by yourself or together with Kelly.
Yeah.
How long does it take for you to evaluate a company? And do you think you've gotten better at it? And I don't mean evaluate in just looking at the balance sheet or just looking at the structural thing. I mean, when they walk into a room and you're there talking with maybe the co-founders, or you there talking with the management team, are you able to really understand the performance of a company now quicker than you were maybe 5 or 10 years ago?
In general, I would say that every day we get a little bit better, stronger, faster as a team, and that we are doing well. In terms of how long it takes to assess a founding team, the answer is it really depends. It's almost like engagement stories, right? Mm-hmm. It's like some people love at first sight. We've had that happen. I can tell you about New Knowledge, which is one of our Moonshots in the Moonshoots Capital. I mean, I met that founder, former Jonathan Morgan, former counterterrorism official, State Department, and I was ready to write the check at the table.
Right, yeah.
And then Kelly met him a few days later, and he's like,
get
out the checkbook.
Yeah.
But some...
Can I pause you real quick? Can you tell the audience what New Knowledge is?
Sure. So New Knowledge, Jonathan Morgan and Ryan Fox. Ryan is an Army veteran, former NSA, and this was the team that first discovered the fake Twitter and Facebook accounts coming out of Russia. So their specialty is disinformation defense, and they can target and sense when campaigns are building to bring down a personal brand or company brand.
Right.
And so obviously this is a super hot space.
Oh, yeah.
We led the seed round. I'm glad we moved so fast. It was a competitive round, and we formed a great relationship with them. They've gone on to raise a Series A, and the Series B is lining up. So that was super fast. But there's some founders that we watch over time. We like the idea, I like the founder, but we need to see the data points. And so what we tell founders is we plot a data point today. Let's check in again in a couple months. Hopefully it's doing this, right, up and to the right. And a lot of our founders we've known for over a year, like Marcus Carey, I knew like 2 years. Veteran, Navy, and finally pulled the trigger and said, he's ready to go, let's back him. So we do, you can sense it as you talk to people. When you hear a lot of I's, too much I, you start to see the communication skills, and you get concerned. So you start to say, is this person a leader? Or is it too much about themselves? And so these, it's the blend. It's kind of the EQ radar is on too,
right?
Especially from a leadership perspective, to see how they communicate to us. Are they coachable? And then how are they interacting with their team?
Why does the technology space? Why is it so interesting to you? It seems like there's something new every single day, and so maybe I'm answering the question for you, but what is it about technology that is really kind of caught your interest?
Well, the way technology can quickly scale and completely disrupt. I don't always love disrupt, but it can just totally change a business practice. We see it, and it just, your mind just blows. Like, I never would have thought I would do my work, my home, my family in this way until you see that deal, and then you see the potential of it if it's successful.
Right.
And so we like to see technologies that can have a massive disruptive effect.
Last question I want to get out of you here is, what advice would you give to veterans who are uncertain about their path after service?
That's a great question, and I spend a lot of my personal time mentoring transitioning vets. First thing I say is figure out the size of company you want to work for. Okay. It's an important data point. Okay, coming
Why?
out of the Army, you're coming out of a big company. So you know what that can look like and what it can feel like, both the downside and the upside. There's over here on the left is a small company, the startup. And then probably in the middle is your medium company, 25 to 100, where it could be a bumpy ride, but they know me, I can see the needle. Maybe I can't touch it, but I can see it.
Right.
Small company, see the needle, touch the needle, move the needle. Big company, I'm told there's a needle. I'm not going to see it, I'm not going to touch it. However, I love, like, say you go to Google. Say you go to Google, and imagine the training that you get from Google or from a big company that may not be offered. I mean, they have their playbooks down. And so sometimes going there, a nice safe step out of the military, that's a good decision, and to build some skills. But my biggest piece of advice to transitioning vets is to develop an elevator pitch, just like a startup.
About themselves?
About themselves. And what I say is to lay out your body of work. Like literally just put it on the table and stare at your career and stare at the things that you've done well and that you haven't done so well. And start to develop your elevator pitch.
Yeah.
And when I left the military, what I said is I have a Bronze Star from Afghanistan, a top secret clearance from the National Security Agency, and a PhD from an Ivy League university. Very random.
Yeah.
You know, good 1, 2, 3,
How do
doing
you
things
kind
in
of
threes.
piece all those together?
But I can lead in times of pressure. I can write. I can speak, and I have the trust of the nation. And depending on who I was talking to, I would load those bullets in the appropriate order. So get that and make it memorable, because I mean I see so many vets. You see so many vets. How do you remember them, and then how do you place them as you want to make introductions for them?
So you found 3 things that you thought you were your strengths, and when you approached a conversation, whether it was in business or maybe just even in social settings, you tried to kind of lean back on those 3 points to sell yourself. In the same way that maybe you would try to sell a business, you were trying to sell your experiences and your character to essentially maybe to a future employer.
The finale statement of that was Bronze Star, top secret clearance, PhD. There's only 12 people in the country that have those 3 things, and I know the other 11.
That's awesome.
No,
That's
did
awesome.
I make that up? Yes, I made that up. Is it probably true? It's probably pretty accurate.
Well, you got me though.
It's pretty accurate, right? And so then, you know, it's just like us and startups. Like, what distinguishes them? We get about 150 deals a month, right? That is so many. You know, 1,500 deals a year. We invest in 5, 6, maybe 7. How do you distinguish yourself among all that noise? And you got to do it as a person, and transitioning vet as well.
Last question I'm going to ask you is there anything that you wish I would have asked you? Is there something that you would like to address, whether that's in the business community or that you see in the veterans community?
Well, thank you for the opportunity, first of all, the invitation and the thoughtful questions. No, I like that we're talking about entrepreneurship. I really think that this idea of entrepreneurship and veterans moving into the space is we're lifting up. It's like we're cranking up entrepreneurship, and the vets are starting to see it come over the horizon. And now, you know, with great organizations like Bunker Labs that are doing so much to help vets, and Vets in Tech out in the Bay Area that are training vets. And then most recently, I went to a graduation about 3 weeks ago at Galvanize, and they had, for the first time ever, this is what they, and I believe this to be true, they had taken the GI Bill for transition soldiers, deployed it into Galvanize, and then Galvanize do what they do, which is to train people to become, you know, Jedi software developers.
Yeah.
And so it's just like all this activity in tech and entrepreneurship. I'm glad that, you know, we talked about that, because that's really the drum I wanted to beat, and to tell these positive stories about vets.
We're on the same page with you there, Craig. For somebody who's interested in learning more about Moonshots Capital or following you on social media, where can they find you?
Moonshotscapital.com. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, and you know, we're active in LinkedIn.
Okay.
My one comment on LinkedIn is Kelly became an advisor to LinkedIn.
Yes.
And so he has 30,000 contacts on
Okay.
LinkedIn. At this point, he's maxed out. It's really one in and one out, but we do a lot on LinkedIn to the extent we can pop it into Kelly's profile and with that reach. So you'll probably see a lot of us on LinkedIn.
That's great. Well, if you are watching or listening, we really appreciate you joining us. Check out Moonshots Capital on LinkedIn. I would really like to thank our guest today, Craig Cummings, for coming on and telling your story. Thanks, you Dan. For your distinguished service to the country while in the service, but also your continued leadership and service after you left the military. That's really the characteristic that we're trying to drive home with veterans here in the great state of Texas. As always, thank you for joining us. We'll be back at this table next time. We'll talk to you soon. Follow us on Instagram at Voices of Vets, on Twitter at Voice of Veterans, and on Facebook at facebook.com/Voices of Veterans. To hear more, please visit voicesofveterans.org. Join us in sharing the success stories of Texas veterans. Thank you for joining us for the Next Gen Warrior Podcast.